Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today we continue our deep dive into the year 1973 with a look at the second quarter, the months of April, May, and June. And as we did last time, we'll break this into two parts. This one will concentrate on music. Next time we'll talk about movies, television, news, and what the Beach Boys were up to. As usual, there's a lot to get to, so let's get started right away. On that first chart of the quarter, April 7th, 1973, the number one album in the country was Lady Sings the Blues by Diana Ross, in the first of its 2 weeks at number one. It was a double album soundtrack to her critically acclaimed performance as Billie Holiday in the movie of the same name. Both the film and soundtrack had been released in October 1972. Diana Ross had won a Golden Globe Award for New Star of the Year on January 28th of 73 and was nominated for an Oscar for Best Actress. At the Academy Awards ceremony on May 27th, Liza Minnelli won the award for Cabaret. But Ross's high-profile appearance may have helped the soundtrack reach number one 11 days later. Elton John's Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player was at number two. This had been number one for the first 2 weeks of March. At its number three peak was Prelude by Diodato. At number four was Eric Weisberg and Steve Mandel's Dueling Banjos. It had been number one for the prior 3 weeks. At number five was John Denver's Rocky Mountain High. This is one of two top 10 albums that had also been in the top 10 as the year began. It had been at its number four peak for the prior 3 weeks. At number six was War's late 1972 album, The World is a Ghetto. This had gone to number one for 2 weeks in February. At number seven was Alice Cooper's Billion Dollar Babies, one of only two albums in the top 10 on April 7th that was still climbing the chart. It'll go to number one on April 21st. At number eight was Traffic's Shootout at the Fantasy Factory. This had been at its number six peak a week prior. And the other album still climbing the chart on April 7th, at number nine was Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. It had just entered the top 10 after being number 26 a week earlier. Pink Floyd will tour the US from April 14th to May 4th in support of the album. In their review of Pink Floyd's early May shows at Carnegie Hall, Rolling Stone magazine will criticize the robot heart of this directionless English din. The public will seemingly disagree. Dark Side of the Moon will reach number one on April 28th. It was a success then. More notably, it will stay on Billboard's album chart for a record-setting 981 weeks. That's nearly 19 years, eventually making it the biggest-selling album released in the 1970s and currently the fourth biggest-selling album of all time. I think my mom would have agreed with Rolling Stone. While she was usually pretty accepting of the music that my brothers and I played as teenagers, she always referred to this as that damn sound effects record. Rounding out the top 10 was Carly Simon's former number one, No Secrets. This is the other album still in the top 10 from the beginning of the year. And in top 10 singles on April 7th, sitting at number one was The Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia. It was a melodramatic country murder ballad that warned, don't trust your soul to no backwoods southern lawyer, 'cause the judge in the town's got bloodstains on his hands. It was sung by Vicki Lawrence. Yes, the same cute little Vicki Lawrence that was a regular cast member on The Carol Burnett Show. And the first of its 2 weeks at number two was Neither One of Us Wants to Be the First to Say Goodbye by Gladys Knight and the Pips. In the number three position, Killing Me Softly with His Song by Roberta Flack. It had spent 5 of the prior 6 weeks at number one. At number four, Ain't No Woman Like the One I Got by the Four Tops, in the first of its 2 weeks at the number four position. Break Up to Make Up by the Stylistics was at its number five peak. Or tie a yellow ribbon round the old oak tree by Dawn was at number six. It'll reach number one on April 21st and stay there for 4 weeks. Sing by the Carpenters was at number seven. It'll reach number three for 2 weeks beginning April 21st. Danny's Song by Anne Murray was at number eight. It'll peak 1 slot higher at number seven next week, April 14th. At number 9 was Also Sprach Zarathustra 2001 by Deodato, a Brazilian keyboardist with a danceable, jazz-influenced take on Richard Strauss's 1896 classical piece, best known as the theme from 2001: A Space Odyssey in 1968. Had this come a few years later, I think we would have called it a disco version. It had peaked at number 2 a week earlier on March 31st, and, as we saw earlier, had propelled the album Prelude to number 3 on the charts. And at number 10 was The Cisco Kid by War. It'll hit number 2 for 2 weeks beginning April 28th. Top 10 singles that would come and go in the second quarter included Call Me, Come Back Home by Al Green, which will hit number 10 on April 14th. Masterpiece by The Temptations will go to number 7 on April 28th. Donny Osmond's The 12th of Never will go to number 8 for 2 weeks beginning April 28th. Little Willie Willie by The Sweet will go to number 3 for 3 weeks beginning May 5th. Drift Away by Dobie Gray will go to number 5 on April 12th. Dobie Gray's only prior hit was The In Crowd, which went to number 13 back in 1965. Stuck in the Middle with You by Steeler's Wheel will go to number 6 on May 12th. You Are the Sunshine of My Life by Stevie Wonder will go to number 1 on May 19th. Frankenstein by the Edgar Winter Group will go to number 1 on May 26th. Wildflower by Skylark will go to number 9 on May 26th. Elton John's Daniel will go to number 2 on June 2nd. Hocus Pocus by Focus will go to number 9 for 2 weeks beginning June 2nd. Pillow Talk by Sylvia will go to number 3 for 2 weeks beginning June 9th. And the Doobie Brothers will have their first top 10 hit with Long Train Runnin', which will go to number 8 on June 30th. Their first top 40 hit, Listen to the Music, had gone to number 11 late in '72. And now let's look at new album releases in the second quarter. Released on April 2nd were a pair of double album sets. The Beatles 1962 to 1966 and The Beatles 1967 to 1970. In March, commercials began running for a deluxe box set of 4 Beatle albums entitled Alpha Omega. It was available by mail order and jammed around 60 Beatles and Beatles solo recordings on 4 albums in roughly alphabetical order. Despite being heavily advertised on TV, usually during the afternoons or late night, it was a pirate, completely unauthorized by Apple, Capitol, or anybody with a legal claim to the Beatles' music. Capitol Records naturally immediately got an injunction to stop the sale of the album and hustled out their own vastly superior legal Beatles' Greatest Hits packages. Released on April 12th was Bloodshot by the Jay Giles Band. It'll hit number 10 on June 16th. As we discussed back in episode 145, U.S. Pop Culture 1972 Part 3, the former Beatles had been strangely quiet in 1972. There was a single from Ringo, 3 from Paul, John and Yoko released the Poor Sometime in New York City album, and George seems to have taken the year off. As we'll see, 1973 will be quite different. Things began to change on April 30th with the release of Red Rose Speedway. It was Paul's second album with Wings, now billed as Paul McCartney and Wings, and his first album release in almost 17 months, which was quite a long time by 1970s McCartney standards. It was originally going to be a double album. Based on the overall quality of the material available, it was wisely pared back to a single album. Even so, it's kind of inexplicable some of the things they chose to leave in, like, for example, loop First Indian on the Moon, while cutting stronger tracks. Still, it was a marked improvement over the last album, Wildlife. There are some really good tracks here, and you got the idea that McCartney was finally beginning to work out just what kind of band he wanted Wings to be. Also released in April of '73 was Call Me by Al Green. This will go to number 10 for the last 2 weeks of June. The Diamond Girl album by Seals and Crofts. Eat It by Humble Pie, which will go to number 13 in the summer. Made in Japan by Deep Purple. It was a double live set that had been released in the UK back on December 8, 1972. It'll reach number 6 for 2 weeks beginning August 11th. The Spinners' self-titled album, which will eventually reach number 14, and Behind Closed Doors by Charlie Rich. An immediate hit on the country chart, this will take a while to cross over to the pop charts after the title track hits the top 40, going to number 15 in the summer, and the track The Most Beautiful Girl in the World reaches number 1 in December. This will go to number 8 on the pop chart early in 1974. Released on May 5th was There Goes Rhymin' Simon, Paul Simon's second proper solo album. One day later, on May 6th, Paul Simon will embark on his first solo tour. Released on May 16th was The Carpenters' Now and Then album. Released on May 18th was Yes Songs by Yes, a triple live album which will hit number 12 in the summer. Released on May 26th was the Pointer Sisters' self-titled album. This album will also take a while to hit. It'll reach number 13 in the fall after the single Yes We Can becomes a number 11 hit. On May 30th came George Harrison's new album, Living in the Material World. 1 month after McCartney's new album, George Harrison was back with his first new studio album since the epic All Things Must Pass in November 1970, 2.5 years earlier. Overall, it was a disappointment after such a long wait and coming after such a great solo debut. Like Red Rose Speedway, it has some really good tracks, but it was sometimes preachy, with George often sounding either morose or grouchy. Still, the album and its single will both hit number 1. Also released in May was Live at the Sahara Tahoe by Isaac Hayes. It'll go to number 14 in the summer. And Tower of Power's self-titled album, which will go to number 15 late in the summer. Released on June 18th was Joe Walsh's The Smoker You Drink, The Player You Get. This is another album that will do a slow rise on the charts. The single, Rocky Mountain Way, will go to number 23 in the fall, and the album will eventually rise to number 6 for 2 weeks on November 10th. Released on June 22nd was Diana Ross's Touch Me in the Morning. It will go to number 5 for 2 non-consecutive weeks in September. Released on June 25th is Chicago 6. This will go to number 1 for 3 weeks beginning July 28th, and then return to number 1 for 2 weeks on August 25th. Released on June 30th is Sly and the Family Stone's Fresh. This will go to number 7 on August 18th. And also released in June was Carole King's Fantasy album. This found her moving toward a slightly fuller, slicker, less acoustic-based sound. The change was reflected in the cover. Departing from the warm, homey, slightly boho photographs that had graced her album cover since Tapestry, this one, and ultimately her next one too, show more of an Art Nouveau influence, another hot trend in the early 70s. And finally, released in June was Leon Live, a triple live album by Leon Russell that will go to number 9 on August 11th. Another album becoming more notable was They Only Come Out at Night by the Edgar Winter Group. This had been released back in November of '72 and had taken a while to catch on. It now peaked at number 3 on June 9th after their instrumental hit Frankenstein had gone to number 1 on May 26th. On May 4th, Led Zeppelin launched the first leg of their 9th American tour, supporting their new Houses of the Holy album. For their performances, Led Zeppelin introduced a new state-of-the-art light show, new glam-inspired wardrobe, and a running time of at least 3 hours. It'll be one of the biggest rock tours to date, breaking attendance and box office records. The first leg of the tour will end on June 3rd after 18 shows across the South and West. For much of the tour, Led Zeppelin will travel in the Starship, a customized 720B passenger jet owned by former teen idol Bobby Sherman and his manager Ward Sylvester. It'll set a new standard for luxury and opulence on rock tours. Over the next several years, following Led Zeppelin, the Starship will be leased for tours by Elton John, Alice Cooper, Bob Dylan and the Band, Deep Purple, the Allman Brothers, the Rolling Stones, and Peter Frampton. That's all for now. Next time we'll continue with movies, television, news, and what the Beach Boys were up to in the second quarter of '73. I appreciate you watching. Hope you enjoyed this. I look forward to your comments. Please hit like if you don't mind and subscribe if you haven't. Hope you'll join us next time when we continue with 1973. Have a great week. Bye.